Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week, U.S. Senator Jack Reed. Senator, the president has a new executive order on immigration directing his administration to enforce the nation's immigration laws more aggressively. Basic question for you. If someone enters the country illegally, against the law, should they be sent back?
Well, I think, again, we have to protect the integrity of our borders, and that legal option has to be on the table. The question in terms of policy is, how do you target the resources most effectively? President Obama deported many people, but the priority were those who were criminals, those who posed a threat to the communities, and as a result, I think there was a much more effective way to get dangerous people out of the country and back to their homelands. This approach, I think, is so scattershot. So talk about roundups,
because we don't have the resources. Is that the issue? We don't have the resources,
and there's competitive resources. If we're going to put 10,000 Border Patrol agents in addition along the border, that's less resources for other Homeland Security operations, Coast Guard personnel, Coast Guard ships, etc. That's where I think one of the issues. The other issue, too, is that this whole notion of the wall, a $20 billion project, which most experts say will not in any way deter determined individuals.
But let me get back to the resources question, because it's a big issue. Yes. The one that's coming to a head is the other resources that could be utilized are local and state.
That's right, and that is voluntary with localities.
Should local and state authorities enforce immigration laws?
It's a federal responsibility to enforce immigration laws.
So no.
It is, I think, no. What it is under our federal system is the state's choice whether they're going to, how they're going to participate. Will they participate actively? Will they participate in terms of not actively, but certainly they're not going to, they can't do anything that will interfere with the federal enforcement of laws. And I think also, too, one of the problems that is illustrated in this law is trying to revive a program where you deputize local authorities to go ahead and be law enforcement officers. One of the dangers there is you have to ensure that they have the training to do it properly, and you don't want a situation where people who are not particularly well trained now have at least semblance of authority to start conducting their own operations along the border or any place in the country. So I think there's some real concerns about the order. There's no question that we have to protect the sanctity of our borders. We also have to, I think, as we tried to do on a bipartisan basis several years ago, pass comprehensive immigration reform. There are people in this country who've been here for many years who are significantly contributing to the community. They should have a way to get at the back of the line, but get in line so that they can become citizens. So that combination of border security, together with the means for people who are, have demonstrated correct behavior and a commitment to this country to become citizens, that has to be part of a much bigger package. Senator McCain and others on a bipartisan basis got it through the Senate under President George W. Bush. President George W. Bush supported it.
In Providence, Mayor Lorza has declared Providence now a, quote, sanctuary city for illegal immigrants. Do you support that?
Again, I think that's the option that a city can take, and I think the mayor's made it very clear that that's what he would like Providence to be.
It puts federal funding at risk. Do you think that's all right?
I think the federal funding issue is not the approach to immigration. I think denying federal funds to a city or a state ends up harming people in a way that has very little to do with immigration and the status of individuals in the community. It takes away CBG money, which helps in terms of economic development. It takes away other resources that go to people who need it.
Well, and you spent a lot of time trying to get that money, and now the mayor could be putting it at risk?
I think the whole approach of using those resources as a lever is wrong, frankly.
At the top of the show, I talked about how the news has been focusing a lot on the Trump administration. That some other headlines that are out there, and one that I caught, I was reading this week that there is progress being made against ISIS forces in the Iraq city of Mosul. That's a city that ISIS had taken over 3-4 years ago now, I think. Is it your understanding that that's what's happening there? That is it primarily Iraqi forces pushing ISIS back, and are they having success?
They are Iraqi forces. They are aided by U.S. and coalition forces. We're providing support to them, but it is an Iraqi fight. They have cleared the eastern part of the city. They are now trying to clear and making progress on the western part. Just today, they secured the airfield, which is in the western part of Mosul. Once they get Mosul secured, then they have a very complicated operation of going in, clearing out a lot of the booby traps, clearing out and bringing back the civilians and running the city in a way that is fair and equitable.
And they have to look up now, right? ISIS is using drones.
I was overseas a few months ago. We were up with the commander for the operation, the American commander was supporting it, and one of the things he pointed out to us, yes, they're using drones, they are arming these drones, they are sending them against both military targets and civilian targets. It is one of the
like drones you can buy in markets, and they attach grenades to it. That's basically what's going on, right?
You can order it through a catalog. You can get it delivered someplace, and then you can go and have some clever young person outfit it with some type of weapon, a chemical weapon, a biological weapon, hand grenades, whatever. And they're using them, and they're using them with frequency. They're using them. They first started out using them for observation. They would fly towards our forward operating bases and do some recons, and we try to knock it down and engage them. And now they're weaponizing them.
President Trump's nominated Neil Gorsuch for the U.S. Supreme Court. You've expressed reservations about the you haven't said how you'll vote yet. A decade ago, you know where this is going, you allowed him to become a federal judge.
Sure.
Because the Senate unanimously did that.
Yeah.
Doesn't that mean President Trump picking the kind of consensus nominee Democrats always say they want?
There's a great difference. And first of all, at that time, he was a private lawyer. He had never served on the bench. He didn't have a record of judicial opinions. He didn't have to take positions. He was basically working as an excellent lawyer for private clients. Also, a circuit judge is a lot different than being a Supreme Court judge. That is the ultimate judicial authority in the United States, and you're not one of the many circuit judges. You're one of a very select few. So you have to be much more careful, and the standards are much higher, and it's much different. But the key difference is the fact that you have to look carefully at a whole record of cases that he's decided in his tenure as circuit judge.
Wouldn't the Democrats, any Republican nominee, in the end, you'd end up having to oppose at this point, because that's where the judicial confirmation wars are?
I think what you have to do, and which the Republicans didn't do, is give the individual an opportunity to respond to questions. I mean, Judge Garland was equally qualified in terms of he was on the circuit, he had been approved, and he was not even given meetings, let alone a hearing. That was one of the most abusive, I think, demonstrations of wielding senatorial power that I've seen in a long time. I don't think we should do that, Frank. I think what we should do is ask probing questions, review his record, not as a private lawyer, but as a judge, and he has now that record, which he didn't have. And then we should decide this, as we've decided all the judges, on first a procedural vote of 60 votes, and then with passage after that.
Meaning he could still be filibustered?
I think we have to stick to 60 votes. That was the framework in which every Obama judge was elevated to the Supreme Court. In fact,